I never expected the word selfish to come from my parents' mouths when directed at me. It wasn't just any word. It was a verdict, a label that carried the weight of disappointment, rejection, and a deep wound that I couldn't shake. I had grown up believing that family was the one place you could turn to when life knocked you down. Friends could drift away, co-workers could betray you, the world could be cruel. But family was supposed to be your anchor, the hand that pulled you up when you couldn't stand on your own anymore. That was the dream I carried, the belief I nurtured, until the moment I asked for help. At that point in my life, I wasn't asking for luxury. I wasn't asking for a vacation or new clothes or anything remotely indulgent. I was asking for survival. Rent had crept up beyond what I could handle on my modest salary. Medical bills from a recent health scare lingered, multiplying like weeds I couldn't uproot. Groceries were no longer a matter of planning meals. They were a question of whether I could stretch a few cans and noodles far enough to last until my next paycheck. Every day felt like an uphill climb with no rest in sight. I had always prided myself on my independence. I was the kind of person who never asked for handouts, who pushed through even when it meant sleepless nights and empty stomachs. But this time it felt different. This time I truly needed help. And who else could I turn to but my parents? After all, they had always told me, "We're family. We'll always be here for you." So I made the call. I rehearsed my words in my head 100 times, trying to soften them, trying to sound less desperate, less needy, as though vulnerability was something shameful. My voice cracked when I finally asked, "Mom, Dad, I'm having a really hard time with bills right now. Could you help me out a little? Just until I catch up?" There was silence at first, a silence that stretched too long, that told me more than any words could. And then my father spoke, his tone clipped, his voice carrying that finality that left no room for argument. "You're an adult now. You need to figure things out on your own. Don't be selfish." Selfish. That word, it stung in ways I can't even describe. Because wasn't it selfish of them to watch me drowning and still refuse to throw me a rope? Wasn't it selfish to judge me for something I had never asked for before? Something I only asked for because I had no other choice? But in their eyes, my plea for help wasn't a cry from a child to her parents. It was a weakness, a flaw, a burden. That night, I lay awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation over and over again. My chest ached with the unfairness of it. I had given so much of myself to keep my life afloat, and when I needed just a fraction of that back, I was told I was selfish. Tears slid down the sides of my face silently because I didn't even feel like I had the right to cry about it. But despite the pain, I resolved to survive. If my parents weren't going to help me, I'd help myself. I picked up extra shifts at work. I skipped meals when I had to. I learned how to live on the bare minimum, turning every penny into a stretch of survival. And for a while, I told myself maybe this was a lesson. Maybe this was their way of forcing me to grow even stronger. Maybe, deep down, they did care, but they wanted me to prove I could do it alone. And then came the day everything shattered. I hadn't gone looking for it. It just happened. I was visiting their house one afternoon, exhausted from work, but trying to show up for family. That's when I overheard them talking in the kitchen. They weren't even whispering. Their voices carried casually, like they were discussing what to have for dinner. My brother, my younger brother, the golden child who had always seemed to live with fewer consequences than me, had racked up massive credit card debt. Not just a little debt, not the kind you can brush off with a couple of paychecks. He had been reckless, spending money he didn't have, digging a hole so deep it would take years to climb out of. And what did my parents do? Did they lecture him about responsibility? Did they tell him to figure it out on his own like they told me? No. They paid it off. Every single dollar. I remember standing frozen in the hallway, the blood draining from my face as their words sank in. They were laughing, joking even, about how relieved he must have been. My mom's voice floated out. Well, we couldn't let him sink. He's still young, he made a mistake, but he'll get back on track now. My throat burned, my hands trembled, my ears rang with the sound of that one word again. Selfish. How was it selfish of me to ask for a bag of groceries? But perfectly. Fine for my brother to be bailed out of thousands of dollars of debt? How was it selfish of me to want help surviving, but selfless of them to reward his recklessness with rescue? I walked out of the house that day with a hollow chest. For the first time, I stopped excusing it. For the first time, I let the truth sink in like poison. It wasn't about money. It was never about money. It was about value, about who they valued more. And no matter how much I tried, no matter how hard I worked, no matter how little I asked, for my worth in their eyes would never measure up to his. That realization broke something in me. It wasn't just about bills anymore. It wasn't just about debt. It was about love. The kind of love that is supposed to be unconditional, but apparently came with terms and conditions I never agreed to. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. After that night, when I overheard my parents' voices carrying through the thin walls of our house and learned about the debt they had wiped clean for my brother, something inside me cracked in a way that felt irreversible. It wasn't the kind of pain you could cry out and let go of. It was deeper than that. The type of wound that silently reshapes how you see the people who raised you. I wanted to tell myself maybe I had misheard, maybe there was some other explanation. But the numbers were too clear, and the tone in my mother's voice, the casual relief, the pride in being able to save him, was impossible to mistake. They had scolded me for needing groceries, but they had rushed to cover thousands of dollars my brother had irresponsibly thrown away. The days that followed were heavy. I went to work in a fog, my body functioning like a machine but my mind replaying. That single word they had hurled at me, selfish. I tried to understand it, to twist it into something that made sense. How could providing for myself through hardship be selfish, while rewarding reckless behavior was seen as worthy of compassion? It was like stepping into an alternate universe where logic had been inverted. One night after my shift, exhausted and sore, I sat at the small kitchen table of my apartment with a notebook. I wrote down everything I paid each month: rent, utilities, the minimum payments on medical bills, groceries. The math never added up, no matter how many times I tried. My pen dug harder into the paper as tears blurred the numbers. I wasn't living lavishly. I wasn't asking for luxuries. I was asking for a little breathing room for someone to say, "We see how hard you're trying. Let us help you carry the load." But instead, my parents had told me to carry it all alone. I thought back to my childhood, and that's when I started connecting the dots I had ignored before. My brother had always been the one they shielded, excused, and rescued. When he failed a class in school, they blamed the teacher. When I brought home anything less than perfect grades, they asked why I hadn't studied harder. When he crashed the family car as a teenager, they laughed it off as boys being boys. When I wanted to join a club that required money for supplies, I was told we couldn't afford frivolous extras. That pattern had always been there, but I had chalked it up to small differences. Favoritism that most families probably experienced. Now, standing as an adult with my back breaking under bills while he lounged debt-free because of them, I saw it for what it was: a deliberate imbalance, a choice they kept making over and over again. Still, a part of me wanted to confront them. I rehearsed the words in my head during sleepless nights. I wanted to ask, why him? Why not me? What did I do that made my needs less worthy? But every time I imagined their faces, I saw only dismissal, the way they had brushed off my plea for help with a wave of the hand, as though I were begging for luxury instead of survival. I didn't know if I had the strength to hear them call me selfish again. The universe has a cruel sense of timing, though. Only a week later, my brother showed up at my door. He was grinning, carefree, holding a new pair of expensive sneakers in one hand and takeaway food in the other. He didn't even knock gently. He barged in, as if my space wasn't really mine. "You'll never believe what Mom and Dad did for me," he said between mouthfuls of fries, his words casual but loud enough to scrape against my raw nerves. Of course, I already knew. I forced a weak smile, my stomach churning, as he bragged about how amazing they were, how family comes through when you need them most. He talked about how lucky he was, how they had swooped in just in time to stop his credit card companies from calling him nonstop. I wanted to scream, to tell him how those same parents had told me to skip meals rather than ask for help. But he wouldn't have understood, and maybe he wouldn't have cared. In his world, it was natural for him to be rescued. In mine, it was natural to be told to fend for myself. That night, after he left, I sat in silence. My apartment felt smaller, darker, as though the walls themselves knew the weight pressing on me. I thought about giving up, about letting the stress and exhaustion swallow me whole. But then something shifted. Anger sparked. Through my grief, steady and fierce. If they wouldn't save me, I would learn to save myself. If they thought I was selfish for wanting fairness, I would redefine what selfishness meant. To me, selfishness wasn't asking for help when you were starving. It was parents choosing vanity and favoritism over the well-being of their child. So I made a decision. I wasn't going to beg anymore. I wasn't going to wait for their approval or pretend that their rejection didn't wound me. I was going to build a life where my survival, my happiness, didn't depend on people who had already shown me where their loyalties lay. I picked up extra shifts. It was brutal. Late nights, early mornings, aching feet, and a body that barely kept up. But each paycheck felt like proof that I was clawing my way out on my own terms. I sold some old belongings, pared my life down to the bare essentials, and funneled every spare dollar into catching up on bills. Some nights I cried into my pillow, exhausted beyond words, but I also felt a small ember of pride burning inside me. That ember grew each time I resisted the urge to call them, to beg again for what they clearly never intended to give. Months passed. Slowly, my pile of overdue notices shrank. Slowly, the constant knot of fear in my chest loosened. I wasn't free yet, not completely, but I was moving forward, and every step forward was one I had taken without them. That knowledge hurt, yes, but it also strengthened me. One day, when my phone buzzed with another group family message from my mother, gushing about my brother's successes, I didn't even feel the sharp sting anymore. I just felt distance, a clarity that maybe I had needed all along. I didn't have to keep seeking their validation like a thirsty plant waiting for rain that would never come. I could water myself. But here's the truth I couldn't ignore. No matter how independent, I became, the scar of their words lingered. Selfish. It would echo in my mind, not because it was true, but because it revealed what they truly thought of me. I wasn't the child they would sacrifice for. I wasn't the one they would shield from pain. And maybe, just maybe, the only way to truly heal was to stop expecting them to be someone they had never been. For weeks after that discovery, it felt like I was living in a constant fog of betrayal. Every time I walked into my parents' house, I couldn't look at them the same way. I kept replaying the word selfish over and over in my head like a broken record. How could they throw that word at me, their child who had been working, myself to exhaustion just to survive, and then, without blinking, open their wallets to bail out my brother? It wasn't just the money. It was the message behind it. It screamed loud and clear. Your needs are a burden. His mistakes are forgivable. I started noticing patterns I had ignored my whole life. Childhood memories resurfaced, and I realized favoritism wasn't something that had just happened recently. It had always been there, woven into the fabric of our family dynamic, and I had been too naive, or too hopeful, to see it. Growing up, when my brother wanted the newest video game console, he got it. When I wanted art supplies, I was told they were too expensive, and I should learn to make do with what I had. When he brought home bad grades, they excused it by saying he was just finding his path. When I brought home anything less than an A, I was lectured for hours about wasting potential. Now, as an adult, the cycle continued. He made reckless choices, like maxing out credit cards on gadgets, trips, and late-night parties, and instead of facing consequences, he was rescued. I asked for help with rent and food during a crisis, and I was treated as if I were trying to take advantage of them. The hypocrisy was suffocating. I remember sitting in my tiny apartment one night, staring at the stack of unpaid bills spread across the kitchen table. My fridge had little more than a carton of eggs, half a loaf of bread, and some wilted vegetables. My body ached from pulling double shifts at work, and my head throbbed from the constant pressure of figuring out which bill to pay first and which to delay. In that moment, I asked myself, why am I always the one expected to suffer in silence? Why is my pain invisible while his mistakes are excused? When I tried to talk to my parents about it, to explain how unfair it felt, the conversation turned into a nightmare. My mom sighed dramatically and said, "We just can't believe you're still upset about this. You need to let it go." My dad added, "Your brother needed help. Family steps up for family. You should be happy we were able to help him." Happy? The word almost made me laugh out loud. They wanted me to celebrate the fact that my brother's irresponsibility was rewarded while my struggles were ignored. They wanted me to smile through the hurt, pretend everything was fine, and just keep grinding myself down to nothing. It was as if they expected me to be grateful for being overlooked. The more I thought about it, the more it felt like my parents didn't just favor my brother. They depended on me not to need anything from them. I was the responsible one, the independent one, the child they didn't have to worry about. And instead of that being a source of pride, it became their excuse to neglect me. They could shower my brother with safety nets and second chances because they assumed I would always survive without them. But what they didn't realize was that I was drowning. Quietly, invisibly. One day, I sat in my car after work and just broke down. Tears spilled down my face, hot and bitter, because I finally admitted to myself what I had been avoiding. I didn't feel like their child anymore. I felt like their afterthought. And no matter how hard I worked, no matter how much I sacrificed, I would never be the one they prioritized. It wasn't just about fairness. It was about love, or at least the lack of it. Parents are supposed to protect you, support you, remind you that you matter when the world feels cruel. Mine did the opposite. They made me feel smaller, weaker, like my very existence was an inconvenience, unless I was proving my resilience. And the cruelest part? They didn't even see it. To them, they were being fair. To them, my cries for help were selfish, while my brother's chaos was just life happening. I began to notice how this dynamic bled into my own sense of worth. I apologized constantly, to friends, to coworkers, even to strangers, for things that weren't my fault. I hesitated to ask for favors, terrified that people would label me as selfish the way my parents had. I carried this invisible weight everywhere, as if I had to earn the right to take up space. And meanwhile, my brother walked through life carefree, shielded by the very people who were supposed to be my shield too. The anger inside me simmered into something heavier. Grief. Grief for the family I wished I had. Grief for the parents I desperately wanted. The ones who would have hugged me when I cried instead of telling me to toughen up. Grief for the version of me that still believed I mattered to them as much as he did. But grief has a strange way of reshaping itself into clarity. As much as it hurt, I started to see that I had a choice. I could keep banging my head against the wall, trying to earn a love that would never be given equally. Or I could stop seeking their approval altogether and start creating a life where I didn't need it, That realization didn't come easily. It came with nights of staring at the ceiling, asking myself impossible questions. If I cut myself off, would they even notice? If I disappeared, would they miss me? Or would they just say I was being dramatic? It came with mornings where I forced myself out of bed, telling myself that my worth couldn't be tied to people who refused to see it. The turning point came unexpectedly. I ran into an old friend at the grocery store. She asked how I'd been, and before I could stop myself, I blurted out the whole story about the bills, the selfish comment, the debt payoff. Instead of judging me, she just listened. And then she said something simple but powerful. That's not selfish. That's human. You needed help. They failed you. Her words cracked something open in me. For so long, I had internalized the label they gave me, believing maybe I was the problem, maybe I was asking for too much. But hearing someone else call it what it was, failure, not selfishness, lifted a weight off my chest. For the first time, I realized I wasn't crazy. I wasn't demanding. I was just a child who wanted her parents to care. And with that realization, the fog started to clear. The anger, the grief, the betrayal, they were still there, but now they had direction. I wasn't powerless anymore. I couldn't control my parents or their choices, but I could control mine. I could choose to stop waiting for fairness that would never come. I could choose to stop letting their neglect define my worth. I could choose finally to put myself first. I thought the sting of being called selfish would fade with time, but instead, it seemed to grow sharper with every passing day. It was like a wound that never fully healed, one I tried to cover with bandages of hard work and silence, but underneath it continued to bleed. Each time I looked at my brother, I felt this heavy cocktail of emotions: jealousy, anger, sadness, but also guilt. I hated feeling jealous of him. He wasn't the one who asked for special treatment. He wasn't the one who demanded our parents pay off his debts. But the fact that they gave it to him without hesitation made it impossible for me not to see him as a mirror of everything I lacked in their eyes. He was their chosen one. He was their investment. And I was their burden. There were nights when I would sit in my small, dimly lit apartment, staring at the ceiling, and wonder if I had done something so terrible in my life to deserve this imbalance. I would replay my childhood in my head, searching for answers. I remembered all the times I had tried to make them proud: good grades, college scholarships, even taking jobs I didn't love just to prove I could stand on my own 2 feet. But none of it seemed to matter. Their praise was always faint, like a passing acknowledgement. Meanwhile, my brother could stumble, fall, and break every promise of responsibility, and yet they rushed to catch him every single time. One evening, as I was leaving work late, exhausted and carrying my last few groceries in a half-torn paper bag, I ran into an old family friend. She asked how I was doing, and without meaning to, I laughed bitterly and said, "Surviving." She gave me a concerned look and asked about my parents. I hesitated, not wanting to open up, but the words spilled out before I could stop them. I told her about how they had refused to help me, but had turned around and rescued my brother from his mountain of debt. She paused for a long moment, then sighed and said something I'll never forget. "It's not that they don't see your worth." Sometimes parents confuse love with enabling, and favoritism blinds them. It doesn't mean you're less. It just means you've been the strong one all along. Her words should have comforted me, but instead, they made me ache more deeply, because strength didn't pay rent. Strength didn't fill an empty fridge, and strength didn't erase the fact that my parents had chosen to invest their time, money, and trust into someone else while leaving me to weather storms on my own. The real breaking point came a few weeks later, when my brother showed up at my apartment unannounced. He was grinning ear to ear, practically glowing with relief. "You won't believe it," he said proudly. "Mom and Dad bailed me out again. I'm finally debt-free." He said it like he had accomplished something incredible, like it was a badge of honor. He didn't even realize that the debt wasn't gone. It had just been shifted onto their shoulders. I forced a smile, but inside I was crumbling. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask him if he had any idea how unfair it felt, how many nights I had gone hungry while he had safety nets waiting for him. But instead, I just nodded, and he kept talking, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing inside me. When he finally left, I sat alone in the silence of my apartment, my chest tight, my hands shaking. That was when the truth became undeniable. This wasn't about mistakes, or money, or circumstances. It was about who they were willing to sacrifice for, and who they weren't. My parents had decided long ago that he was worth saving no matter the cost. And me? I was worth lectures and guilt trips, but not love in the form of help. Not trust, in the form of support. For the first time in my life, I realized I had to stop expecting them to change. Waiting for fairness was like waiting for rain in a desert. It would never come. If I wanted to survive, if I wanted to build a life where I wasn't always the overlooked child, I had to cut that cord. I had to let go of the idea that they would one day see me, choose me, value me the way they did him. And that thought was both devastating and liberating. The night I decided to let go was one of the hardest of my life. I sat at my small kitchen table, staring at the pale light of a single lamp, and allowed myself to feel everything I had buried for years. The disappointment, the jealousy, the endless ache of wanting to be chosen, to be loved in the same way, but never receiving it. I cried until my chest hurt, until I could barely breathe, because I knew I wasn't just grieving over money or favoritism anymore. I was grieving over the family I thought I had, the family I kept believing would someday balance out love the way I needed. And accepting that truth felt like burying a part of myself. But in that grief came a clarity I had never experienced before. I realized I had spent my entire life waiting for them to hand me validation, waiting for them to recognize the strength I carried. But they never would. Their love was conditional, and it flowed so heavily toward my brother that I had drowned in its absence. And still, I was alive. Still, I had built something from nothing. Still, I had endured. That realization didn't erase the pain, but it gave me something my parents never had: perspective. In the days that followed, I started noticing the small victories in my life that I had always overlooked. The way I had managed to keep a roof over my head with no one's help. The way I had learned to make tough decisions without a safety net. The way I had carried wounds and scars but kept moving forward. I realized my life, though fragile and difficult, was proof of my resilience. And resilience, unlike handouts, could never be taken away from me. Then came the phone call. My mother's voice was frantic, almost trembling. "Your brother's in trouble again," she said, without even a hello. "He made some bad choices, and we need your help this time. Can you send money?" I froze. For years, I had been on the receiving end of their excuses, their justifications, their refusal to extend help to me. And now, when they had drained themselves dry to rescue him over and over, they were asking me, the child they had refused, the one they had labeled selfish, to save him. For a long moment, I didn't say a word. I just listened to the sound of her breathing on the other end of the line. I thought about how many times I had begged for even a fraction of this same compassion, only to be told I needed to figure it out on my own. And now, here they were, admitting through their desperation that the strong one, the overlooked one, was the only one left to hold everything together. And that was when the weight lifted. I finally understood my worth had never been less. It had simply been unseen. And their blindness was no longer my burden to carry. I told her calmly, "I can't help." She started to protest, but I interrupted. For years, you told me I had to stand on my own, so now he can do the same. My voice shook, but there was a firmness in it that I had never allowed myself before. And before she could reply, I hung up the phone. The silence that followed was deafening, but it wasn't painful. It was peaceful. For the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to earn their love or prove my worth. I wasn't competing for scraps of attention while my brother feasted. I wasn't the forgotten child anymore. I was simply me. Strong, scarred, independent, and finally free. I don't know if my parents ever truly realized what they had done, or if they still believed they were right in the way they divided their love. But I stopped waiting for their awakening. Because, the truth is, I don't need them to see me anymore. I see myself. And maybe that's the hardest but most powerful lesson I've learned. Sometimes the love we beg from others is the very love we're meant to give ourselves. So yes, my parents may have chosen my brother every time. They may have called me selfish when all I wanted was fairness. But in the end, their rejection became the foundation of my strength. And even though the scars remain, I walk forward carrying something they could never give me, my own self-worth, carved out of pain but shining brighter than anything they ever offered. And that is enough.